What's up, folks? JC Owens here with another episode of Rock My World. Now, we will be interrupting our normal investigation into the industry, as it were, due to flooding, power outages, and the like. Man, all this rain has got me feeling kind of like Ann Peebles and I can't stand the rain. That kind of shit. Like we really are having a heck of a storm here, and it's made filming and recording audio obviously quite difficult. Luckily, we had the studio here, which blocks out most of the sound, but the water is right up to the step. I know y'all can't see it, but right on the other side of the wall here, there's drum sets and all that kind of stuff. We've got you know 15-inch subwoofers over here, and we've got amp heads, and they like the whole nine, just out of frame over here. So trying to make sure this water don't come into the studio has been taking up most of my time here the past few days, weeks, whatever you want to call it. Starting to feel like I'm going to have to be Leonardo DiCaprio floating on the door. Well, I guess he wasn't floating on the door. That was Rose, wasn't it? Well, you know how that goes. Like, well, to be honest, we all know that he could have fit on that door. Well, just as a little segue, we all know he could have fit on the door. That chick was just trying to cover up her dirt. She done went and did the dirty and saw a chance to tie up some loose ends. Like back that tying up loose ends stuff we got to earlier. But anyway, since we are kind of taking a hiatus from the heavy stuff, it is holidays anyway, so I figured I would share with you like some of the stuff I do outside of singing, songwriting, acting, and all the other stuff that I do, including YouTube. And Granddaddy always did tell me, too many irons in the fire, some of them are bound to cool, so I try not to get too many going on, but I'm a busybody, what can I say? But anyways, this is what I do with my time. I am a martial artist. I have been for most of my life, and I'm sure most of you, if you had seen the video of the Georgian dancers I showed you probably a few days ago, was it? You'll have seen one of these on the waist of each one of those male dancers, and this is called many different things. In Persia, it's called the kami. In Russia, it's the kinjal or kanjali. In Georgia, which is where I tend to focus on mostly, it's called satavari, I believe. And I made this one, from ground up. It is real. It is pattern welded. It's got 3 different kinds of steel in there. Quite sharp. I wouldn't want to run my finger on it. Wouldn't want to run my finger on it at all, actually. The covering here is hand-done brocade from India, actually, which is something the Georgians would have done at the time. They have huge connections with India. Most people don't really realize that Georgia, the Caucasus Mountain region in general, and Indo-Europeans having such a connection with India, but the Indo-Europeans actually conquered parts of India, and that's where a lot of this stuff eked in there. It started with this thing's ancestor called the Akinakis, which was very, very similar. This is just a more modern version. This one would have fell around about like late 1700s, early 1800s. And no, don't worry, folks, like all you animal lovers out there, I did not use real bone or ivory. This is a synthetic that I came up with that is pretty good at mimicking it, anyway. All the brass inlay and everything, I did all that. Cast the pieces, cut them out. As far as these go, cast this part. It's triple riveted, just like it would have been historically. I did the brass inlays down here, cast the chape, the whole nine. I carved the scabbard, stitched it, and all that good stuff. And that is, you know, basically like what you have to do these days. Once upon a time, guys there would have been a guy to make the blade, and then there would have been a guy to make the handle, and then there would have been a guy to put it all together. And but now in the modern day, if you want something like that, you have to come to a craftsman, an independent craftsman like me, who either does it all himself or has a workshop usually that he and the other people there all make it. But either way, like, it's a much more involved process than it used to be. You kind of have to master several different crafts, leather working. You got to be able to sew fabrics, of course. You got to cast metal. You got to be able to engrave metal. You have to be able to forge metal. You have to be able to sharpen blades. You have to be able to do all this kind of stuff. But as I said before, I'm a bit of a busybody. Music isn't my only, the only flavor of hobby I have, I guess, or work for that matter. I will do that. I build guitars. I make custom guitar picks out of brass, and so much more. But that's kind of what you have to do when you're an independent artist these days. If you don't want to rely on the establishment, as it were, if you don't want to rely on that legacy system, then you're going to have to, get used to, not making as much money, not getting as much fame and praise, and having to hustle a little bit. I mean, there's no real, ifs, ands, or buts about it. In this modern age, you kind of have to, hustle a bit. I mean, the globalist elites are not slowing anything down, and as AI and stuff gets more and more common, more and more spread out all across the industry, it gets used more often, you're going to see people having to hustle a little bit more. However, if any of you have been paying attention to what people like Jermaine Dupri and people like him are saying, I don't necessarily agree with everything Jermaine Dupri might be about, but he is right about the fact that this AI and artificial push is going to make authenticity more important to people overall. People are starting to buy vinyl records again. They're starting to buy cassette tapes again. They're starting to care about all this kind of stuff that I've cared about forever. This is part and parcel to why I do martial arts, why, I love these old songs, and I like to, I like to make weapons that, people haven't used in, over 100 years. Like, keeping these traditions alive is extremely important. It's extremely important to know, to really know where we're going. Like, you can't ever know where you're going unless you know where you've been and where you're at. Unless you know where you've been and where you're at, you're probably not going to be able to get to where you're going. And in the modern era, we tend to have forgotten our traditions. We've forgotten why these things even are. And it's causing a lot of issues. Yes, like, there are some things that can be changed, like they're not set in stone, but then again, there are some things that are absolutely set in stone that we cannot change, no matter how hard we try. No matter how hard we try. We can give it everything we got, and we'll never change it, not one bit. We can live a lie. We can live a lie, and that will be extremely painful. Like living any lie is. Anyone who's ever, been a liar, or, especially, if you've been a drug addict. If you've been a drug addict like I have, then you've been a liar. That's kind of, the two things kind of, go together like peas and carrots. They go together like peas and carrots. That kind of thing. And you can't separate the two, really. If you're going to do a lot of drugs, then you're going to wind up telling some lies here and there in order to get your fix, or to get away from the police, or whatever it may be. You're going to be forced to lie. And, that's one of the main reasons I stay away from that stuff, not to mention the fact that as many have heard me say before, as a singer, you really, really cannot do hard drugs all the time and still maintain your voice and everything. Yeah, other like members of your band like might be able to play pretty tore up and their instrument still basically sounds the same even though they miss a note here or there. But for us, for those of us who sing, you can't be slithered all the time. You know, I thought once upon a time that I could do that. Everybody thinks they're going to be that one dude. They're going to be the dude who can, you know, who can do all the drugs and drink all the booze and still be able to perform. But no, I'm sorry. That is another corporate lie that they sold you in order to sell records. But the truth is, nobody can live that crazy forever. And I think that's also part of what's happened to rock and roll, and and things like hair metal. Like you can't take hair metal 100% seriously if it's continually singing about some of the stuff it sings about, right? Like it's made a joke of itself in so many ways because people know that you can't actually continue to party like that. Like David Lee Roth is still performing, but David Lee Roth is not still, drinking himself stupid every day, right? Like Ozzy performed right up to his last day, but Ozzy quit, drugging and drinking himself into a stupor every day. That's the key to longevity, folks. Balance. Balance. You can't overdo it. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's drugs, or if it's sex, or if it's rock and roll itself. You can overdo it, and if you do, you will pay. It always happens that way. Well, almost always. Nothing ever nevers and always is. It just does, like, there's no such thing as forever and always. Like, everything that has a beginning has an end. Everything. Entropy is built into all systems, and we cannot get away from that. We just can't. But that said, folks, I'm going to hop off here and get back to trying to fight this water. Now, I hope y'all have a great day, and have yourself a merry little Christmas.